You know what's terrifying? It's not loneliness, not failure, and not even death. It's silence, real silence. The kind where there is no music in the background, no scrolling, no notifications, no one even texting you, no one validating you, and there is no noise to run toward, just you. And for most people, that's unbearable. Not because silence is empty, but because silence reveals. It exposes the conversation we spend our entire lives trying not to have. And that's why some people can sit in a quiet room for 5 minutes and suddenly feel anxious, restless, and uncomfortable, like something is crawling under the skin. And the craziest part is that most of them don't even realize what they're escaping from because the modern world has made escape look normal. You wake up, phone, noise, work, people, distractions, more distractions than exhaustion, and then you sleep and repeat that same. And somewhere inside that endless cycle, a person slowly loses contact with themselves, not dramatically but quietly and surely. And that's the dangerous part. People think that destruction is loud, but the deepest form of self loss happens silently. One day you wake up and realize you don't know what you truly feel anymore. You don't know what you actually want, and you don't know if your thoughts are even yours. And this is exactly why most people fail at deep silence. Because deep silence is not about relaxation, it is about confrontation. And most humans have built their entire personality around avoiding confrontation with themselves. But here's what they don't understand: the people who learn to survive silence become dangerous in a world addicted to distractions. Because once a person is no longer afraid of being alone with their own mind, very little can control them anymore. Now, there's a reason every ancient tradition respected silence, be it monks, warriors, philosophers, or many mystics. None of them treated silence like emptiness, rather, they treated it like power. Because silence does something noise never can. It forces truth to rise, and truth changes people. Not motivational quotes, not productivity hacks, not fake confidence, but truth. And the problem is, truth hurts before it hints. And that's why most people never stay silent long enough to hear it. But here is a fear people don't talk about. Most people think they are scared of failures, but they're actually not. They're scared of meeting the version of themselves that exists underneath distractions. Think about it. Why do people instantly grab their phones the moment they wake up? Why does someone play videos while eating, scrolling while resting, listening to something while walking, checking notifications every minute, even when nothing important is happening? Because stillness creates awareness, and awareness can become painful. The moment external noise disappears, internal noise becomes louder. Suddenly, you notice things, you notice how exhausted you really are, how lonely you have been, how fake some relationships feel, how much resentment you carry, how many dreams you abandon, how much of your life is performative. But silence removes anesthesia. That's why so many people unconsciously avoid it. And the scary part is, modern life rewards this avoidance. A destructive person is easier to influence, easier to manipulate, easier to sell to, easier to emotionally control. Because if a person never sits alone long enough to understand themselves, they spend their entire life absorbing identities from outside world. They will become copies, not individuals. That's why silence is rare now, and rare things do become powerful. Let me give an example of a man who spent years chasing success. Every day looked impressive from the outside. Meetings, calls, trips, money, constant movement. People admired him. But one night during a power outage, his apartment went completely dark. No internet, no music, no television. Just silence. At first he laughed it off. Then 10 minutes passed, then 30 minutes. And then something strange happened. He started feeling uncomfortable, not bored, uncomfortable. Because for the first time in years, there was nothing between him and his own thoughts. And suddenly he realized he had spent his entire life running from grief, running from insecurity, running from the fear that no matter how successful he became, he still did not feel enough. That night changed him. Not because silence gave him answers, but because silence exposed the questions he had been avoiding. And most people never allow that moment to happen. They interrupt it immediately by phone, music, conversations, calling, or doing anything just to avoid that. Because modern human would rather be distracted than being disturbed. But disturbance is often the beginning of transformation. But then, why silence feels so heavy? Have you ever noticed how some rooms feel emotionally loud even when nobody is talking? That's because silence amplifies unresolved emotion. The human brain is not designed to suppress forever, but to avoid emotionally does not disappear. It waits, and silence becomes the place where it finally catches up. That's why some people can't sit alone without overthinking. The mind has become a storage room of unprocessed thoughts, emotions, childhood pains, humiliations, regret, fear, shame, abandonment, and so many more. And most people don't heal these things. They distract themselves from them, and distractions feels effective until silence arrives. Then everything surfaces at once. This is why deep silence can almost feel physical. Heavy chest, racing thoughts, restlessness, and urge to escape. But here's the truth nobody says that discomfort is not proof silence is bad. It's a proof your nervous system has been overstimulated for too long. We live in a world where people are consuming more information in one day than older generations consumed in months. And yet people have never felt more disconnected than them. And yet people have never felt more disconnected from themselves. Because information is not wisdom, noise is not connection, and stimulation is not peace. A person can spend 12 hours online and still feel emotionally empty. Actually, many people do, because the human soul was never designed for constant input. It needs pause, not entertainment, but pauses. The kind where the mind settles enough to finally hear itself. But here is the thing most people don't realize that the world profits from a distraction. Yeah, it sounds something uncomfortable. If you become deeply comfortable with silence, a lot of systems lose power over you because silence sharpens perception. A people who perceive clearly become difficult to manipulate. Think about how dangerous clarity actually is. A person who understands themselves deeply does not need constant validation, does not chase every trend, does not panic over opinion, does not depend on noise to live, does not depend on noise to feel alive. That kind of person becomes emotionally independent, and emotional independence is rare. Most people are psychologically dependent on stimulations, and that's why boredom now feels unbearable. Years ago, boredom created reflection. Now, boredom creates panic. The moment silence appears, people rush to destroy it because silence shows the dopamine cycle. And when dopamine slows down, reality becomes visible again. That's when people notice how unhappy they are, how disconnected they feel, how exhausted their minds has become. But instead of listening to those signals, most people escape back into stimulations, which is why their life never truly changes. You cannot heal in constant noise, you cannot understand yourself in constant distraction, and you cannot build inner strength while emotionally running every day. At some point, a human being must learn how to sit still, not physically, but mentally, emotionally, and spiritually. Because the inability to sit alone quietly is not a small weakness, it's a sign of internal fragmentation. But do you know what people lose when they avoid silence? This is the part most people never realize. Avoiding silence does not just prevent discomfort, It costs them entire dimensions of life. They lose clarity when a mind is constantly flooded with external input, where inner voice become faint, and eventually you stop knowing what you genuinely think. You start confusing influence with identity. You start living reactively instead of consciously. That's why so many people drift through life feeling strangely detached from themselves because they have spent years hearing everyone except their own mind. But there's silence, deepens perception. It allows emotions to fully unfold instead of being instantly numbed. Without silence, people become emotionally shallow without realizing it. Everything becomes quick, fast, surface level. Even relationships. That's why two people can spend hours together and still not feel not just external silence, but internal silence. And the ability to fully experience another human without constant mental noise. Most people have forgotten how to do that. And maybe the saddest thing they lose, you cannot hear intuition in a mile, drowning in stimulation. The deepest realizations often arrives quietly, during walks, late nights, moment of stillness. That's why some of the most important moments in life happens in silence. Not because silence is magical, but because silence removes interference. Some people spend their entire lives avoiding silence, and wonder life forces it onto them. Maybe through a breakup, a sudden death, a failure, an empty house, a lonely night maybe. And suddenly there's no more noise protecting them, no more distractions strong enough to suppress what they feel. That's when many people collapse emotionally, not because the pain suddenly appeared, but now let's talk about the people who master silence. Oh, here's the fascinating part. The people who learn how to enter silence without fear begin changing in ways others can't understand. Their attentions become sharper, their emotions become clearer, their reaction slows down. They stop needing constant approval because silence builds self contact, and self contact creates stability. That's why deeply grounded people often seem calm in situations that overwhelm everyone else. It's not because the life is easier, it's because they've already faced themselves privately. Most people are terrified of external chaos because they have never resolved internal chaos. But once a person learns how to sit with discomfort without escaping it, they become mentally stronger. Not performatively strong, but actually strong. The kind of strength that does not need to announce itself. You can always tell when someone has spent time in real silence. There's a depth in the way they speak, patience, awareness. They don't react instantly to everything because silence teaches observations before reaction, and that changes everything. But you might be asking, why deep thinkers often need isolation? There is a reason creators, philosophers, writers, monks, and visionaries throughout history protected solitude. Not because they hated people, but because constant noise weakens original thought. Most ideas people call their own are borrowed. Borrowed opinions, borrowed desires, borrowed goals, borrowed personalities. Silence disrupts that process. It forces independent thinking. And independent thinking is uncomfortable because it separates you from the crowd. There's another reason people fear silence. Because silence slowly removes illusion. You begin noticing where you are pretending, where you are performing, where you're living for appearance instead of truth. And once you see that clearly, you can't unsee it. That's why silence changes people permanently. A person who truly meets themselves can never return to unconscious living. But what about the modern addiction to escape? Look around carefully. Almost everything today is designed to keep attention externally trapped. Infinite scrolling, short form content, constant stimulation, artificial urgency. The modern world does not reward deep presence, it rewards compulsive attention. The more distracted a person becomes, the weaker their relationship with themselves get. That's why many people now feel emotionally numb. Not because they feel too little, but because they feel too much too often without processing any of it. The brain never rests, and eventually, overstimulations create emotional exhaustion. This is why silence can initially feel painful because it's the nervous system detoxing from chaos. The same way, unhealthy food makes natural food taste bland at first, constant stimulation makes silence feel empty at first. But if a person stays with it long enough, something incredible happens. The mind starts slowing down, thoughts become clearer, attention deepens, emotions become less reactive, and for the first time in years, they begin experiencing life instead of merely consuming it. There's the difference. Most people are not truly experiencing life anymore, they're consuming experiences. There's a huge difference. But do you know what's the most important conversation of your life? At some point, every human being faces a hidden question. Can you exist without distractions? Not for productivity, not for aesthetics, not for social media, but genuinely. Can you sit with yourself honestly? Because that relationships determine almost everything. The relationship you have with yourself affects who you love, who you tolerate, who you react, what you choose, what you avoid, what kind of life you build. And silence reveals the truth of that relationship. That's why many people avoid it, because beneath all the noise, many people are deeply disconnected from themselves. And reconnecting requires grief. Grief for lost time, grief for abandoned trips, grief for ignored emotion. But the grief is healthy because healing begins the moment honesty begins. And honesty grows in silence, not noise. So then we've talked a lot about those, but the final thing, what is the solution? So how do you stop fearing silence? You stop treating silence like emptiness and start treating it like recovery. But understand this clearly. Deep silence is not achieved instantly. Mind addicted to stimulation cannot suddenly become peaceful overnight. You train it slowly. First, remove unnecessary noise, not forever. Just intentionally. Take walks without your phone. Sit without music sometimes. Eat without consuming content. Drive without constant stimulation. At first, it will feel uncomfortable. That's normal. Your brain has been conditioned to expect constant input. But if you stay long enough, the discomfort changes. Then comes the second step. Stop escaping every emotions immediately. Not every uncomfortable feeling needs to be numbed. Sometimes anxiety is information, sometimes sadness is truth, sometimes restlessness is your mind begging for reconnection. Listen before escaping. That alone can change your life. And finally, learn to observe yourself without judgment. This is where most people fail. The moment they enter silence and see pain, insecurity, anger, regret, they panic. But silence is not showing you these things to destroy you, it's showing them because they are already there. Awareness is not the enemy, avoidance is. And the goal is not becoming emotionless, the goal is becoming conscious. Because conscious people live differently. They choose differently, love differently, think differently. And eventually they suffer differently too. Not because pain disappears, but because they stop running from themselves. And maybe that's what silence truly is. Not emptiness, not loneliness, not punishment at all. Maybe silence is the place where a person finally meets the part of themselves they abandoned while trying to survive the world. And maybe that's why it feels so emotional. Because underneath all the noise, most people are carrying versions of themselves they never stop to listen to. The exhausted version, the hurt version, the younger version, the honest version. Silence brings them back to the surface. And yes, they can hurt, but it can also heal. Because the moment a person stops running from themselves, something changes. Their mind becomes clearer, their emotions become lighter, Their presence becomes deeper, and for the first time in a very long time, they no longer feel like strangers to themselves. So tonight, before you sleep, turn everything off for a minute. No music, no scrolling, no distractions. Just sit quietly and listen carefully. Not to the world, to yourself. Because the life we're searching for externally might be waiting underneath the noise we never stop escaping. Thank you for listening.